do an intro today. No, we're not. Just this.
Howdy folks, it's Richard over at Bad Blacksmith. Today we're going to finish up this piece of steel. Now, a lot of this video footage I cut, clipped, trimmed, and shaved down in size because it was a lot of stuff. Most of it is me just repeatedly beating the hell out of a piece of steel. So I cut it down just to show the progression it makes throughout the entire process. So what I'm basically doing right here is drawing out the piece of steel. It's nice and uniform now, so I'm just going to keep hammering it till it gets a little bit longer every time, until it's the right length for the knife. And then I get to start shaping the knife at that point. Now, once this piece of steel gets to the desired length, I am going to start letting it get thinner and wider so you don't end up with a 2-inch thick piece of steel you have to grind through to make the knife. Most of this blade is going to be free-handed, just up to my personal interpretation of what it's going to look like. What I just generally do is I start hammering it until it starts making a shape that I like. It's pretty much how I make a lot of my knives, really. Now the good thing about the steel, once it starts getting thinner and longer, is it becomes a lot easier to work. It also gets hotter a lot quicker. It takes a lot less time and energy to heat up a thin piece of steel as opposed to a big, thick hunk of ugly scrap metal you cut off something. This is also the part of the project where you have to start being a little more careful. You can't do as many reckless strikes on your piece of steel because you gotta start shaping it slowly. And if you don't start shaping it early, you're gonna have a pain in the ass to deal with later on. So you gotta make sure you don't do things like fold steel over itself and, you know, put dents in it you're gonna have to buff out later. I used to have a lot worse of a problem with that than I do now, but I still run into it. In the end phase of it, you have to grind out those deep dents you left in the side of the steel. So you have to be cautious of that on the final steps of working this piece. And yes, I do have 3 different hammers here. I have my large one, my medium one, and my small one. Each for different reasons, really. The large one is for, when I want those heavy strikes to flatten things out better. And the middle one, obviously, is my go-to standard hammer, and the small one for minor details. I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory at that point. And the same thing goes with your tongs. You're going to want at least 2 pairs of tongs, close grip, wide grip, and then more for different kinds of pieces of steel, round, square, or who knows what. It's time for everyone's favorite segment, Cooking with a Blacksmith. Now today I am preparing a fried egg cooked over a hot piece of steel. Will it cook the egg or will it not? Sometimes I get bored while working on these things and do really stupid things in between. I really do love how the egg cooks in the same shape as the steel underneath it. You can see where the main heat is in the pan. I guess this counts as a sunny side up egg. Don't worry, I did not eat it. I think I chopped it up and gave it to the dogs. Alright, okay, let's focus here and get back to work. Drawing out this piece of steel and starting to shape it. Now, sadly, around this time of shooting all these videos, I believe the battery in my camera's microphone was starting to die. I've since replaced that battery, but I'm sorry to say that you won't be able to hear the lovely sound of my forge roaring or me hammering a piece of steel over and over and over again. It's at this point that the shaping of the steel starts to happen, when I start to shape the handle and the edge, you know, whatever funky thing I'm going to put on this blade. It's going to be a hunting knife, in case I was wondering. Now the steel I'm using for this piece, I don't know what it is. I do know that I've made several blades with it, and it is a tough steel. I also know that if you don't quench it correctly, it goes to hell. If you quench it in water, it forms a bunch of microfractures, and then that knife is, you know, basically a piece of glass. You have to quench it in warmed up oil. And that is, you know, comes down to knowing what you're working with and how to quench it. Different steels need different ways to be quenched. And if you don't know, you're going to have to take and cut off sample pieces and test them. And I did a lot of testing. The first two knives I ever made with this steel were beautiful pieces, and they are completely worthless because of microfractures. Microfractures I didn't even notice until you start grinding and polishing. Once you polish it, you start to notice there are cracks that just don't go away. And then if you apply pressure on those cracks, that piece of steel shatters like glass. So, you know, it comes down to trial and error when you have a mislabeled piece of steel, or you got something from a junkyard or a scrap sale. And you know, I am a big fan of recycling steel when I can. If you know it's a high carbon steel and that it is usable, I think there's no reason why you shouldn't cut it up and turn it into something useful, like a hunting knife or a fishing knife. Now I'm going to let you guys in on a little secret that I used right here. You know, you might notice it in movies, but if you sprinkle a little bit of charcoal dust on your forge before hammering with a steel, you get this cool flare-up effect. I just thought it looked cool, and I was messing around a little bit. Now for the fun part. Now I'm sure much, you know, more professional blacksmith have a much easier time with this, but I always find it hell to hold onto the steel with the tongs while forming the handle. It's just something about the angle and the impact that, you know, have the piece of steel flopping all over the place. And also, whenever you start doing these little fine changes to the piece of steel, you know, like shaping the handle and the end, I always get the worst hand cramps while holding those tongs. And I know maybe if I went and actually fixed the tongs or wore gloves all the time, it wouldn't be as bad. But, you know, what do you expect me to do? Be smart about things? Jeez. And oh, I love a white hot piece of steel. It just looks beautiful. Oh, but look at that slag flying off. Let me tell you something, when that slag lands on your wrist or your hands, oh, it stings. It leaves a nice little burn mark on you, that's for certain. Or it'll burn through your clothes like nothing. But it doesn't burn for long, it loses heat really quickly. And I'd like to remind people that I have never been formally or properly trained in blacksmithing. I've learned everything from watching videos and just trying to teach myself. So, if you see me doing something, don't take that as law or something that you should, you know, try at home. If it's available to you, find yourself a mentor to teach you blacksmithing. Don't go jumping off the deep end like I did and end up, you know, burning the hell out of yourselves a million times over. In hindsight, I could have saved so much time, probably would be way better at blacksmithing if I would have found myself a mentor all those years ago, instead of trying to teach myself off of YouTube. Now what I'm doing right here is using the edge of the anvil to shape the handle of the blade. To create that nice steep change in thickness with the handle. Now, I personally find that when you're working, shaping the handle on this blade, you're going to want to make sure to thin it back out, because it's going to mushroom over, and you don't want it to become an out of control issue. You don't want the handle to be way wider than the blade, unless you're going to do a solid steel handle. In that case, you're not putting wood on it or anything. Then you want it thick, obviously. Also, I'd like to take a moment and talk about safety. Safety is your friend. See, I'm wearing boots right here. I learned the hard way about what happens when you don't wear boots. I was wearing some meshed, the type, meshed tennis shoes, and I was sharpening and polishing a knife, and it slipped, it fell, and it landed point down into the side of my foot. I have a huge scar there, and, those shoes still have a hole in the side of them, so make sure you have proper footwear. Don't be stupid. You can also see that it rained the night before this clip, as the anvil has a nice orange rusty spot on it. But, this is El Cheapo the anvil, so who cares? Who cares? Now, if I had a nice expensive anvil, it's going to have some cover from the rain. Trust me on that. Also, look, you can see that I've busted the tip off the horn here. I tried to fix it a little bit, but it's not worth it. You can also see here that the knife is actually starting to take a proper shape. It doesn't look like a really large butter knife anymore. Most of the time I just freehand it. It's up to interpretation of what the steel looks like and what I'm in the mood for as I'm reaching this stage of making a knife. Obviously, if I have something very particular in mind, I will aim for that, but otherwise it's just freestyle. Now at this point, it's grinding time. At some point, you're just going to have to say, should I keep putting it in the fire to try getting it closer to the shape I want, or can I just grind it to get there? And that's what I chose to do. You got to grind out the dents and make the side look pretty and get the point all fine. And so sometimes that's what you just got to do. You just got to finish it up with the angle grinder and a belt sander. And, well, folks, that about wraps it up from taking a piece of scrap metal and turning it into a knife. I'd appreciate a like and subscribe down below if you don't mind it. And I'll see you next time I decide to do something dumb.